Hello, everyone. Thank you for waiting. We're a couple minutes over here. Welcome to this webinar with Sharon McMahon. We're very excited to have you. Thank you for being here. I am Claire Howard, NCHE's Communications Coordinator, and welcome to this webinar. So Sharon McMahon is known as America's government teacher. She's going to share her expertise in making civics and history engaging and accessible. And I'm here with my colleague from NCHE, Dalton Savage. Yeah, please introduce yourself in the chat. So really quick before we jump into Sharon's presentation, we're going to do a quick lightning round, ask her a couple questions just about her and kind of various random aspects about herself. So, okay, are you ready, Sharon?
I'm ready.
Okay, perfect. So if you could teach history with any historical figure, who would it be?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, it's almost seems like a cop out to say Abraham Lincoln because he's such a popular figure from history, but for good reason. For good reason, right? So that's I'm going to go with him.
Okay, all right.
Mhm.
If you could invite one of the figures from your book, The Small and the Mighty, to sit with us tonight, who would it be and why?
It's going to be somebody I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, but her name is Septima Clark, and she was a teacher. And she spent her whole life as an educator, and so I feel like I relate to her in that way. But she also just inspires me in so many ways that I would love to even know more about her. You know, like what I know about her, I love so much, and I would love to get to know her as like a living, breathing human being.
Yeah, I love that.
Mhm.
What is one historical misconception you wish more students, I'm just going to say the population, that you wish more of the population understood correctly?
Mm. Well, okay, this is not, I mean, there are many. I'm sure most teachers would be like, actually, that never happened. History teachers love a good actually. That's something we're all very excellent at. Actually. But you know, one of the things that I think is interesting that a lot of people don't realize is and maybe this is not a misconception, but it's a fact that I find really interesting, which is that one of the reasons the United States made such a difference in World War II, you know, like when we entered the war on the side of the Allies. Of course, we like to make it seem like our men were the bravest fighters, our pilots were the most skilled, you know, like all of these, this list of attributes that we espouse for ourselves. And those things are definitely true. We had many brave fighters and great pilots and all that kind of stuff. But really, what America brought to the table that turned the tides for the Allies was our defense production. We could just make more stuff than anybody else. We did not have the best rocket technology. We didn't. That belonged to Germany. We did not have the most fighters. That was Russia. That was the Soviet Union. We didn't have a strategic advantage of what the coast of France looked like. We didn't have a lot of the strategic advantages of people who were on the continent. But what we did have was a giant country with a lot of people and a bunch of natural resources and a whole bunch of women to work in the factories while the men were off fighting overseas, and women to run the family farms that fed the Allies. Food was a huge issue for the Allies. So I also think it's very interesting that during World War II, when women had to take over a large chunk of family farms, that in some cases, farm production increased by 20% when the women took over the farms. Things things got turned around. Despite their, lack of upper body strength, they had a, there was obviously a big motivator to like do well because people were counting on us. But I think that's just a fun little tidbit that what one of the things we were bringing to the table was the biggest thing we were bringing to the table was our defense production.
That's so fascinating. I didn't know that. That's my favorite part of the history world is just continually in this
There's
space learning
always
stuff.
something to learn. Yes.
I love that. That's
Yes.
fantastic. Okay, I have one last lightning round question for you.
Mhm.
It's my favorite. If you could put one primary source in every student's hands, what would it be?
Oh, goodness. I mean, again, I feel like this is a cop-out answer, but I feel like Americans really do have a very shallow understanding of the Constitution. They think that the Constitution says things that it doesn't say, or they have no idea what it does say. And I feel like, in an era where people are constantly questioning, what rights do I have? Is this okay? That having like our own little pocket copy, which are not very expensive, you can get on Amazon for not much money at all. I feel like having that and also a little education about how to read this, and the context under which these things, these amendments and the articles were written, the context under, which those things were added to the document, that can only help us. That can only help us at this juncture, I feel like. So I have to pick the Constitution.
I love that. I don't think it's a cop out. I think it's probably the correct answer.
I feel like it's the right answer. Like, and we
Yeah.
could make it happen, right? Like you can buy little pocket constitutions literally at the checkout at Barnes and Noble for like a couple bucks. I feel like if we really wanted to put a constitution in everybody's hands, we could figure out a way to make it happen.
Yeah. If the women could, I'm not
If
surprised
the
that the women
women
could do
were in
that.
charge, how hard can it be? Boys do
If
it.
the women were in
Yeah.
charge, we would have 20% more constitutions in everybody's hands.
That's right. Now with 20% more founding documents. That's right. That's our,
America. I
yeah.
love that.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for indulging me, everyone. So I'm gonna turn off my camera and I'll just let you present, and then when we come back, we'll do a bit of a moderated discussion.
Okay, great. I'm gonna try sharing my screen and see if I can get everything to work. Hold. You would think that we've been using Zoom long enough that everybody would be a Zoom expert, and nevertheless, nevertheless, there's always something. That's how it always works. Okay, here we go. Now I'm gonna be able to make it work. Yes. Okay, hopefully y'all can see this. So, like most of you, I started out as a classroom teacher, and I look back at these pictures of myself as a classroom teacher. And at the time, of course, I did not think that this was a good picture because it's blurry and, for all the reasons, it's not a particularly flattering picture. But now I'm especially glad to have it because it, represents a moment in my life when I was learning how to be a good educator. It's obviously a process. The process of becoming a good teacher is an important one. And I look at this now and I'm just like, bless her heart. Bless her heart with that celery green shirt dress that she wore in heavy rotation. I collated all of these quotes, and my mom made all of these signs as decoration in my room. I had these things laminated, and I, kept them for a very long time. Notice in the left uh, side of the screen, what do you see? An empty TV bracket. And in this school, the school I was teaching in had so few resources available, that it was a very challenging environment to operate in. No, the classrooms did not have TVs. We did not have computers. We had one computer lab that was never open because we didn't have anyone to, it was only in the library and we did not have a librarian. I did not go into the library one time teaching at that school. It was never open the entire time I was there. They couldn't afford a librarian. And so consequently, nobody could access the computers. All of our textbooks had been destroyed in a water main break flood that had ruined our textbook room. And we didn't have the budget to replace the textbooks. Neither did we have overhead projector screens or overhead projectors for every classroom. And neither did we have adequate photocopying resources. Every teacher was allowed $15 worth of copies every month. And there was actually a person whose job it was to make copies. And she kept track of how many copies each teacher used. And if you made more than $15 worth of copies each month, they deducted it from your paycheck. And that is not a joke. That is not an exaggeration. Like that actually happened. So we had no books, no computers, no TVs, no overhead projectors, and only $15 a month worth of copies. And so I definitely cut my teeth on some a challenging school environment. At the end of that school year, I actually wrote a grant proposal to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation asking if we could get some, just could we get some like overhead projectors and an overhead projector screen in every classroom? Like that would make such a huge difference. If ever, so I went to every teacher in the school and was like, do you have this equipment in your classroom? And I quickly discovered that only about 12 teachers out of the like 110 teachers in this school had the necessary equipment. So I put in, like I looked up on in the catalog, how much would these things cost? And added it all up and I asked for a grant of like $32,000. That's how much I asked for. And they gave it to me. They gave me a $32,000 grant. They gave the school a $32,000 grant to buy all of this equipment for everybody. So these are the kinds of things that like at the time you're looking at the picture, you're like, but I look dumb. But now when I look back at this, I'm reminded of all of this sort of time in my life. I look at this very grainy picture of myself this was a picture on my staff ID badge. And I'm like, who allowed this infant child to teach students? Why are babies teaching babies? Great question. I don't know the answer. But this also amuses me that I was such a tiny, tiny, tiny baby, and they were giving me the keys to a classroom and leaving me alone with all of these children. One of the years that I taught, I was teaching in a school that was new to me in California, and I'm from Minnesota, where we don't have earthquakes. We do have winter, but we don't have earthquakes. But they do have earthquakes in California. And in every classroom, they had an earthquake disaster kit. And I was very curious about it because I was like, what's in an earthquake disaster kit? And it was like in the closet in my classroom. And in the earthquake disaster kit was a box of granola bars, a box of Band-Aids, and a gallon of distilled water. And I remember thinking, how are we supposed to survive an earthquake with granola bars and Band-Aids? This makes no sense. Didn't make sense to me then. It still doesn't make sense to me now. But I taught in a bunch of different kinds of schools in 3 different states. So I really did have the chance to see what education was like in a variety of different places around the country, like both coasts and the Midwest. And I taught in, Title I schools. I mentioned the school that I taught in that had absolutely no resources. And I've also taught in some of the nicest, most well-equipped suburban schools that you can imagine. And I still look back at this year and I still remember all of these students' names, and I have more pictures from this classroom experience too. But I look back on this with such fondness, and I remember thinking that watch was really cool too. It had a blue face, and my mom gave it to me as a teacher gift. So all that to say, I've been around the block a couple of times. I've probably taught in a school at some point in my career similar to the one that you are perhaps teaching in now. I also had my own library poster, and I was very proud of this library poster because I grew up going to the library. I loved the library, and I remember seeing like all of the celebrities who had their own library posters. It was like Arnold Schwarzenegger, with his like Read poster. So getting my own library poster was like a big high point in my career. And I do look back at this picture now, which is obviously from a very long time ago. And they allowed us to each choose our own quote. And I look back at this picture now and I look at the quote that I chose and I'm like, she didn't know it yet, but that quote is going to mean something to her in the future. And if you can't read it, the quote that I chose was, even the smallest person can change the course of the future. And of course, it's a quote from Lord of the Rings. But the fact that, like, the one thing that sort of came to mind for my library poster quote, and of course, now I've gone on to write a #1 New York Times bestselling book called The Small and the Mighty. And I just love that this was like my mind was thinking about these things even in the decades preceding me becoming an author. One thing I learned as a teacher, and this is me on the steps of the Supreme Court with a group of students. One thing I learned as a teacher is that everyone wants to feel like who they are matters. Everyone wants to feel that way. Students want to feel that way. Teachers want to feel that way. Teachers want to feel respected in their chosen profession. They want acknowledgement that what they are doing is difficult and important. They don't want to feel like they're in an adversarial relationship with administration or with the community or with their students' parents. These are just like universal ways to feel at work, and also just universal ways to feel as a human being. And I remember this day very well because I was teaching in suburban Washington, D.C. And if any of you teach in the DC or in the Maryland or Virginia suburbs, you know exactly what kind of schools are there. They're very nice, very well funded. The parents are largely quite rabid about education. And, everybody brought their $5 so we could take the metro subway down to the Supreme Court. And I had actually worked for 2 years to get tickets to take my students to the Supreme Court to hear like live oral arguments. The Supreme Court chambers are actually very, very small. It seems grand because the building is so large and the pillars are so tall, and it seems like this is a massive facility, but the actual chambers are not big. And there's very limited space for the public. They reserve a chunk of it for, of course, counsel, parties to the case, the press. And so what's available to the public is quite small. So it took a long time to get tickets, and we finally got tickets, and everybody brought their lunch, and we took the subway, and we got down there. And the case that we were hearing was relatively boring. It was not an exciting landmark case. It was largely procedural. It involved banking regulations. Certainly not something that 17-year-olds were super excited about. But I do remember Ruth Bader Ginsburg was still alive. And the first person who was getting up to speak, said, may it please the court, and got started with his presentation. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg interrupted him immediately and said, sir. And he, stopped talking, and he's looking at her. And of course, I'm sure you know this, that the Supreme Court does frequently interrupt the attorneys that are speaking to ask questions during their presentation. They don't wait until the end always. And she said to him, "You are arguing this case on faulty logic. Do you wish to continue?" And there are very strict rules inside the Supreme Court. Like no phones, no noise, don't get up, no talking, no whispering. They are guards that patrol the entire room. You cannot, like, nobody can snicker even. And all of my students were like, like they knew they couldn't make any noise, but they were like, you could tell they wanted to be like, she got him. And you could tell he doesn't know what to say. He's like, no, no, ma'am. No, I do not. I sure don't want to argue this case on faulty logic. What are you going to say in that moment? And this is my presentation. How do I pivot to something different? Um, and he did continue talking, etc. But even that moment is one that I still remember very vividly. And one of the things that we talked about as we were sort of debriefing our field trip to the Supreme Court was the students felt like even this case that was kind of boring, that was kind of about banking regulations or whatever, even that really mattered to somebody. Even that really mattered to somebody. And so this idea that, who we are and what we do matters to somebody is just such a universal feeling that I know teachers deal with in their own students on a daily basis. People still want to believe that who we are matters. And that is not a new thing for humans to want. In fact, history is full of people who desperately wanted to believe that who they are and what they did mattered. And that's one of the things that I wrote about in this book is, unsung Americans who changed the course of history. And as luck would have it, or actually not luck, as history would have it, a number of the people that I profile in my book were teachers. And I will talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But after this book came out, by the way, tomorrow is my book's 1-year anniversary. It was published 1 year ago tomorrow. It's a momentous occasion for me. We're trying to figure out how we're going to celebrate a year of this book being out in the world. After this book was published, I went on this huge book tour around the country and spoke at a lot of theaters and talked to a lot of amazing people. And one of the things that people continued to impress on me as I went to all of these book signings and, spoke in front of thousands of people is something that people have a hard time believing, which is that what I do matters and who I am matters. It didn't matter if I was speaking at a crowd this size in a huge theater, in beautiful theater in Nashville, if I was just like doing a book signing at a Barnes and Noble on the Upper West Side of New York City. It didn't matter if I was spending hours signing books in a sold out signing line. None of that actually mattered. That humans are the same from coast to coast, and no matter their station in life, we all want to know the answer to that question. And it helps me when I'm speaking to audiences now, and I know that it would have helped me even more if I were still standing in front of a high school classroom, to really keep this in mind and to really infuse my lessons with this idea, that throughout history, humans have engaged in behavior to answer this question, that this is one of our most deep-seated longings, is to know if who I am matters. One of the things that I really learned while I was writing this book, because it took me 3 years to research it and write it, is this idea over and over that people always feel like their lives are small and insignificant. And it's easy to feel that way, especially when you're scrolling social media or you turn on the news and you open the newspaper and there are just so many things that have gone wrong. Just overnight. Overnight, 20 new things have gone wrong. And you feel like, what am I supposed to do about all of this? This all seems like a hot mess inside of a dumpster fire inside of a train wreck. And it seems like really, really challenging to try to do something about it. But I can tell you that throughout history, the people that have made the biggest difference in their communities and ultimately in the country are the people who just kept doing the next needed thing. And the next needed thing, for many people, was teaching school, working as a nurse, showing up to that event, helping someone who needed it. The next needed thing is what the world needs from all of us. And the good news is that that is available to each one of us, no matter where we are, how little money we make as a teacher, how too few zeros there are on our paychecks, no matter if we have issues with physical limitations, no matter if we have a myriad of external circumstances that are impacting our ability to go out and work in our communities. Doing the next needed thing is something teachers are excellent at and something that is available to every single one of us each day. What the next needed thing looks like is going to change based on your station in life. Like when I was still in the classroom and I was pregnant and also had two small children, what I had the capacity to engage in was very different than what I might have the capacity to engage in today. And that actually is great. That is actually perfectly okay. At no time in history has any character, any figure, other than somebody with designs on some kind of totalitarian regime, no figures that you admire from history have ever tried to do it all. They have never tried to solve all of the world's problems. That doesn't mean that all of the world's problems weren't important to somebody. That doesn't mean that all of the world's problems don't matter or shouldn't be addressed. But none of the figures that you love from history, that whose stories tug at your heart to the extent that it made you want to go into this profession, none of them tried to do everything. And I do feel like, and I hear this from a lot of people, that we are pulled in so many directions now with social media, with the availability of information. It makes it very easy to see and understand all of the things that are going wrong in the world. And in some cases, that access to transparency is excellent. It helps us hold leaders to account. It helps us understand what is going on so that we can't be swindled or duped. There are positives to having this free and easy access to all of this information. But the downside is that humans do not have the capacity to take in a fire hose of information every day, to have compassion for every single person whose story they encounter, and to act on every single one of those. In the same way that you cannot teach every child in your classroom, or I'm sorry, every child in your school. You don't have the capacity to teach every child in the school. You have the capacity, and sometimes even that's questionable, to deal with the children immediately in front of you in your classroom. And we don't ask teachers, well, you haven't taught everybody, so you're doing a bad job. We don't have that expectation of other people, but yet somehow we have that expectation of ourselves. That if we are not moving the needle on every single cause we care about, if we're not moving the needle on childhood poverty, if we're not moving the needle on gun violence, if we're not moving the needle on environmental regulations or on and any list of societal ills that we could spend an hour laying out. If we're not doing something about all of these problems, then either we're a loser or we might as well just give up because we can't even manage to try. But I want to encourage you that the people you admire never did that. Certainly not the Abraham Lincolns, like one of everybody's, again, one of people's favorite stories from history, favorite characters from history. He did not try to fix it all. He even fixed the problems that he tried to address, he addressed imperfectly. We can now look back on Abraham Lincoln and with the clarity of hindsight, say it would have been better if he had done this thing sooner, or if he had done this other thing as well, or if he had only said it this way. We can critique his past performance, um, and also still admire him for the contributions that he made to the country and by extension to the world. But he did not try to do it all. It also helps me to remember that people like Abraham Lincoln struggled. Some of the biggest like the most admired people in the world struggled. Abraham Lincoln struggled mightily with his own mental health. As a young man before he got married, he was very prone to depression. And in fact, there are stories that he himself repeats where he is struggling so mightily with depression that he writes letters to his friends saying, "You guys better come over and get all of the knives out of my house because I might do something with them." And there were times where neighbors, this is when he was working as a postmaster in Illinois, neighbors would see him wandering in the woods with a gun. And they would come out and say, "Are you okay? And you know what? You're looking a little too skinny. Why don't you come stay with us for a little bit? Come stay at our house. We'll get you some food, get your legs underneath you again, and then you can, go back home when you're feeling up to it." There were times where, by today's standards, perhaps we would have called law enforcement and committed him to a psych hold, and that's not even an exaggeration. So I'm not saying that to say that mental health struggles are not to glorify anybody's mental health struggles or to demonize them, but just to paint the picture that um, even the greatest leaders in history struggled, and that feeling of struggle is normal. The people who sit atop the world and feel as though all they have to do is snap their fingers and everyone does what they ask and their life is perfect and wonderful. Those are usually not the people you admire from history. And I have found as I've traveled and taught over the last number of years that there has been an awakening of sorts among Americans, particularly in my experience, particularly among women who are maybe over the age of 30. This is not universal. There are certainly men, there are certainly younger and older people, but women who realize maybe I didn't get all of the history education I was supposed to have gotten when I was in school, or because I didn't use it, I lost it. You know, like how we all took a couple years of Spanish or whatever foreign language. And if you don't keep up with it, all you remember is like a couple of key phrases. You know, in the year 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Like that's what you remember. You don't necessarily remember the things that we would like for you as teachers, but we would like for you to know. Um, these are these are very common ways to feel. And so I have discovered this sort of awakening amongst certain people who understand, like, I did not get the kind of education that I wished I would have gotten. Maybe I wasn't paying attention. And I want to make sure that my children get the best history education possible. I want them to know the truth of history, that more than one thing can be true at the same time, that Abraham Lincoln can be an incredible leader and somebody to whom we can look up to, and also, he can be somebody who struggled with mental health. And also, he can be somebody who was imperfect. I didn't even get into all of his heartbreak, his son dying in the White House, his wife having what we would call to what, or we would have called 20 years ago, a nervous breakdown. Um, Both of those things can be true at the same time. And I do think there has been in certain groups this an awakening to the idea that history is not the retelling of a good guys versus bad guys story, as much as our brains would like to categorize that. As much as it's easier for us to be like, these are the people on the white horses, and these are the men with the black capes and the scary music, as much as we would like to reduce history to a telling of good guys versus bad guys, almost always more than one thing is true at the same time. This is one of the women that I wrote about in my book. Her name is Septima Clark. And she had a set of life circumstances that nobody would ever want to trade places with. She was born at the end of the 19th century. Her parents had been enslaved. And she was born as a Black woman in the South, in South Carolina, where most occupations were closed to her. And she got married, had a baby. That baby died, and she was absolutely beside herself. She was suicidal for a period of time, and she saved sort of at the last moment from having died by suicide. And then she has another baby. And shortly after having another baby, she discovers that her husband has a secret second life and that he actually is married to a different woman and has children with a different woman. And then he had the audacity to die, leaving her as one of the worst things you could be in the early 20th century as a Black woman in the South, which was a single mom. And being a single mom is still extremely difficult today, even with a much better social safety net. But it was very, very difficult for single women to be able to earn a living to support their children. There were so few professions that were open to them. So eventually, Septima becomes a teacher. And she discovers that she cannot get a job in Charleston, where she lived, because Charleston public schools refused to hire Black teachers of any kind, meaning a Black teacher could not teach in a Black school, or certainly not teach in a white school. She eventually had to leave Charleston and leave her son in the care of her former in laws in an effort to get a job on one of the islands off the coast of South Carolina. And she gets a job at this school called Promise Land School. And the school had very few resources. It didn't have glass in the windows, for example. And of course, we all know that the bugs in South Carolina are they're prevalent. And so they would often have to make the choice between closing the wooden shutters to try to keep some of the bugs out, but then it would be dark in their schoolhouse, or leaving them open and getting eaten alive. And this was during a time where poverty was so rampant that infant mortality was incredibly high, that contagious illness it was incredibly high. The living circumstances under which she found herself and she was teaching in were hardly anything but the promised land. And I can promise you that she did not walk into that classroom every day and think to herself, well, I am really changing the course of history here. I can promise you those were not the thoughts that she had. Eventually, she does get a job in Charleston public schools, and she becomes an advocate for civil rights. She joins the NAACP and takes part in a couple of different lawsuits aimed at equalizing pay between men and women and for doing the same job, and equalizing pay for people of all races who were doing the same job. Black women teachers were paid the least of everyone on the pay scale. Black male teachers made more than black female teachers. Female teachers made less than male teachers, just across the board. And so her advocacy for civil rights, as we started approaching the middle of the 20th century, did not make her any friends. There were a lot of forces that had sort of conspired against Septima, demanding that she resign from her civil rights organizations and that she stop, meddling in all of this quest for equality. And she ultimately refuses. She says, "I'm not going to stop doing that." And so she loses her job as a teacher in Charleston Public Schools. And at the time, she may have thought something like, "Little do they know. You thought I was meddling before. Now I have all the time in the world. Now I have no papers to grade and no lessons to plan. And I have all the time in the world to devote to civil rights. So watch out." She eventually moves to Tennessee, where she takes a job working at Highlander Folk School, which became a very important place that trained civil rights leaders. And had Septima not lost her job in Charleston Public Schools, she would not have gone on to teach John Lewis and Rosa Parks. When she was teaching on that little island full of poverty in Promised Land School, where she was not thinking to herself, I am really changing the course of the future here. She had no way of knowing what was coming down the pike, that someday she would lose her job. But that losing that job allowed her to do things that would change the course of world history, truly of world history, in ways that she couldn't even have imagined. And so people's opposition to her continued to grow. Multiple times, people tried to firebomb her house. She was falsely accused of a crime and arrested. At this time, she had, a grandchild, and the police come to arrest her. She's a grandmother, and they come to arrest her with her grandchild in the house with her, and the grandchild is like, "Don't take my grandma." Like, it's very traumatizing for her grandchild to watch her get carted away by the police. She did not have a set of life circumstances that any of us would want to trade places with. And at the end of her life, um, she really does. You know how they say that living well is the best revenge? She really does get some of the best revenge in that she gets elected to the Charleston Public School Board. The group that refused to hire her initially, and then the group that fired her for working for civil rights. Ultimately, she gets elected to help be in charge of that community. And you can see Septima in the middle here, and then two people to the left of her. That's Rosa Parks. You can see in this picture here, when Septima is an older woman, she is at the podium speaking. And who is far to the left in this image? It is Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. And Rosa Parks is immediately to her right. And this is like Ralph Abernathy and the heavyweights of civil rights are gathered around Septima Clark, who is now regarded by many historians as the mother of the civil rights movement. When she gets to be an old woman, people go to her and say, "What have you learned from all of this? You have lived through so much. You've lived through so much heartbreak, and you have seen so much accomplished." And she says something that I think is incredibly useful and instructive for this moment in history. She says, "I have learned that I can work with my enemies because they might have a change of heart at any moment. And you know what? She would have had a lot of occasion to be bitter. And we probably would not fault her. We'd be like, yeah, you should not have had to live through that injustice. We can understand why you would be angry. She would have had every right to be angry for the cards she was dealt, the circumstances she was confronted with. And she said after she gets elected to the school board, she learns that she can work with her enemies, not because she might grow to believe her enemies' views are legitimate, not because she is soft in her beliefs, not because she is compromising her integrity, not because she is giving up on her moral values. She learns that she can work with her enemies because they might have a change of heart at any moment. And she says, I've seen it over and over again. And how are our proverbial enemies? And of course, this is a broad statement. We can just say people who make our jobs difficult, people who make our lives harder, people who are unkind or who are disrespectful. How can our enemies ever have a change of heart if we will not work with them? And I know this is a tall ask, and I'm certainly not advocating for people to put themselves in harm's way. I am not saying that people who are from a marginalized group need to go out and risk their own personal safety. I'm certainly not advocating for people to remain in abusive relationships. And that's not what Septima was advocating for either. Notice she didn't say, I let all of my enemies move into my house. I let all of my enemies trample all over me. I substituted their beliefs for my own. She's not advocating for putting herself in harm's way, but what does she say she is willing to do? Work with them for the betterment of children's lives, for the betterment of children's education, because they might have a change of heart at any moment. And how are they supposed to see the light if we do not turn it on for them? And that this is one of the reasons Septima is on my list of like, if I could bring one person from this book back that I would love to sit down with, it has to be her because I feel like her wisdom is extremely hard won. She is not just typing in some ivory tower, like, here's some of my good ideas. These are things that she learned the hard way. In an era of, if I don't like you, I will delete, block, and unfriend you. You're dead to me, in an era of political violence, in an era of a time when it's difficult for students even to get along, especially in a secondary classroom where we know that this group over here has one set of political beliefs and this group over here has a different set, and often these are at odds with each other, in an era where it is even difficult to press a friend button on a phone. Septima knew that the next needed thing was sometimes being willing to build a coalition around some kind of important change that needed to happen in a community. And that is something that teachers are uniquely equipped to do because we do it in our own classrooms every day. So I want to just sort of encourage you this evening that if it is feeling really difficult out there, and admittedly it is, if it's feeling really difficult, you're not alone, you're not weird for feeling that way, you're not even wrong. Hard things are hard. These are difficult things to do. This is not the easy way out. But I remind myself of this regularly. If Septima can do it, so can I. If she can do it, so can I. I have everything I need materially. I have a warm home. I have all the food I need. I'm lucky that my children are healthy. I have my own health. Like I have everything I need. And yet sometimes I feel discouraged. And I'm sure, and I know she did feel discouraged too. But if she can persevere, then so can I. And each one of us has the ability to continue doing the next needed thing in our classrooms and in our school communities and in our communities at large. So I'll leave it there for tonight. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And I know the hosts have a few questions before we get into that too, but thanks for being here.
No, thank you, Sharon. Usually I take notes because I want to share things out with teachers and my pages are full. I would like to say, going back to one of the first questions that Claire got into with you about if you could teach history with any historical figure, I would have originally said Clara Looper, who civil rights leader from Oklahoma, sit-in movement, but now Septima's story is powerful. So thank you for sharing that with us. We do have some questions. If anybody has more questions, please place them in the chat, the Q&A. Claire and I are happy to go through those. Before we get into the specific questions from the chat, I do want to ask, with millions of people following you online, how do you decide what issues that you share with others during your, I check the videos on Instagram and all over. So how do you decide what gets, talked about?
It's a great question. And I try to talk about things that I have some level of expertise in, right? Like I don't know. There's a lot of things I don't know about, and me offering my thoughts on those things could actually contribute to like more misinformation or problems in a community. So I'm not going to give you health information. I'm not going to tell you what you should, kind of medical advice you should have. So I try to stay in my own lane. That's the first thing. And I know I'm respectful of my own, I try to be respectful of my own knowledge. These are the things I know about. All this over here, I don't know about. So I'm not going to talk about these things because I don't want to lead people down the wrong path. I also do tend to have a focus on my social media platforms for topics related to history, the legal system in the United States, and specifically about the structure and function of the United States government. Those are always going to be topics that I sort of, err on the side of discussing. And I also, I have this saying that I try to live by and that I try to impart to people, which is principle over party. That there are principles of democracy that we all as Americans should really be agreeing to. And those are things that are sadly not particularly well understood, even by some members of Congress. Like, how did you get to be elected when you can't even name the three branches of government? And I wish that was a joke, but it's not. So I do tend to focus a lot on the fundamentals, and talking about them is always my goal, to talk about them in a way that scaffolds the learner up to this, level so that we can have a higher level conversation. If I immediately launch into the filibuster when you don't know the three branches of government, I am leaving you behind. And every educator knows exactly what we're talking about. We're always trying, and it's challenging to get everybody up to some, minimum level where we can all proceed from here, right? But the trick is that it is especially important for adults, but nobody likes to be made to feel like they're dumb. And so if you talk about it in a way that is too degrading to adults, like it's too elementary, where you're like, now boys and girls, like if it has like a now boys and girls vibe, that is a big turnoff to people. She thinks we're idiots. But it also can't be so far above their heads that they don't understand what's happening, because that also makes them feel dumb. We think that talking in big words makes oh, I'm respecting your intelligence. In many cases, it actually makes people feel dumber. Like if I get dropped into like, physics, it's not my jam. That is not, no shade to it. I think it's cool. That's not how my mind works. If I went to a PhD physics class today, you might think to yourself, oh my gosh, you're learning from the best of the best. You're learning everything, like you're learning such high level material. No, I'm going to leave that class feeling more dumb than when I went in, because I understood nothing. And I looked around at my peers in that class and they were all like taking notes, being like, yeah, okay. Like they all knew way more than I did. I'm going to feel by comparison much less intelligent. So that's always the balance to strike, is especially when it comes to talking to adults or parents, is scaffolding it well enough so that they can kind of get up to the minimum level, but not talking at such a high level that you also are losing everybody who's not up here with you.
I have to
Scaffolding.
say in your book, oh, go ahead, Dalton.
I'm gonna say scaffolding. It's like you're a teacher.
It's almost like I've done this as a job. Weird.
I was gonna say you do such a good job in your book of not talking down. I don't come from a history background. I'm in this space within the last few years, and it really helps me understand everything, all the kind of like higher level topics that we're talking about. Not like hello there, guys and gals, or whatever. It's very welcoming. So I really
Thank you.
appreciate that about
I
your writing.
appreciate that. Thank you.
There is a question, of course, anytime. I'm here for compliments. There's a question from that's kind of along the same line. So I might paraphrase a little bit. They're saying that they want to help their students understand civics and history in a meaningful way, but like it's like walking on eggshells right now.
Yeah.
Everything is politically sensitive. So how do you kind of, how do you broach these subjects in a way that is accurate, like
Yeah.
honest, age appropriate, and then also not like stepping on toes? I don't know.
Not too
Super
controversial.
complicated. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That it's not too controversial. I get it. I totally get what you're saying. And one of the ways that I have found success is by illustrating important concepts, not with modern day examples, but with examples from history. Because anytime you bring in figures that are currently alive, or even that are not in power anymore but left office 10 years ago or whatever, people have emotional feelings about those figures, and they immediately judge you as being, oh my gosh, she's so whatever. She's so conservative. She's so liberal. Like they automatically assign these sorts of labels to you when you are illustrating concepts with modern day examples, no matter how carefully you tread. It is really, really difficult. And especially I would tell people, if you're living in an area where this is a really, really contentious time, for some areas of the country, it's worse than others, that let's say you're talking about principles of democracy, like the rule of law, like consent of the governed, like, checks and balances, these very fundamental principles of civics. Talking about times from the past that where those have been tested, where the rule of law has been tested. How would we judge if people were obeying the rule of law? Using this illustration from the past, I have found is less fraught than being like, and Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Like, as soon as you start bringing in modern day political figures, that is when everyone's hackles are raised. They're much less raised if we're like, and Benjamin Harrison, right? Like, you don't have a big emotional reaction to like Ulysses S. Grant. So it's just a little, I'm sure most people here already know that. There's a little trick that I have.
No, that's definitely helpful. Thank you. We were also interested, so I see a question here that mentions about you talking about hope. So how do you personally hold on to hope when news cycles where information is so easily accessible and it's everywhere? And sometimes it can feel so discouraging. So how do you hold on to this hope?
Yeah. That's another great question. And one of the things that I would tell you is that if you are waiting to experience hope as a feeling that is going to happen to you, you are probably going to keep waiting. If you are waiting for, you to wake up one morning and the sky's blue and the birds are chirping and somebody brings you a hot cup of coffee in bed and, everything's really looking up. And you're like, I'm just waiting for that day where I can feel like everything's going great and I have hope has returned to the earth. You might keep on waiting. Hope throughout history, over and over, the people who made the biggest difference, even if they were nobody, had no access to the levers of power, had no money, had no fame, the people who made some of the biggest differences are people who continued to act as though what they did mattered. That is what hope is. It is the choice to believe that the story isn't over yet. The story is not over yet, and we still have the ability to help write the ending. And so to think about hope, to reframe what hope is, rather than a feeling I'm waiting to experience, which leaves you feeling disappointed and hopeless. We end up just feeling, well, it's hopeless because we don't see any signs of progress. We don't see any evidence that things are improving. This is a very common sentiment. I can tell you that Harriet Tubman did not wake up in the morning and think, today is the day that white supremacy is over, right? She did not wake up in the morning and be like, all of my relatives have been freed from enslavement, and my external circumstances give me so much hope that everything is going to go my way. She did not have that experience. And yet she continued to act as though what she did mattered. She went back to Maryland over and over again from Pennsylvania, helping to free somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 enslaved people. She continued to work as a Civil War spy. She continued to, she saved over 500 lives during the Civil War. She helped people learn how to make a living during the Civil War. She did all of these important things, not because she woke up each morning feeling a sense of hope. She was a disabled American. She had a traumatic brain injury. She had what we would know today as epilepsy. Her external circumstances were almost never good. They were almost never good. And yet, when you read her words, when you read the writings of people who knew her, you can see that she continues to believe that the story is not over yet, and that I have the ability to try to impact the ending. So to me, that's how I think about it. And it's not always easy. It really isn't. I can promise you it's not. It's not, it's a discipline. But I keep coming back to that sort of North Star of the story isn't over yet.
I love that idea. I've never, it's such a fresh perspective of hope being a discipline
Mhm.
and like an action and not necessarily a feeling.
A feeling.
I love that. That's
Mm.
such a, what an inspiration. I'm going to totally take that with me for a long time, especially because it is so hard to be a normal person trying to consume news right now.
Yeah.
Um, and it's like, well, there's no hope of hope. If I
Right.
have to keep continuing to live in this place where it's just gonna keep beating us down, but it is like a lot of this is a an action. So I'm really grateful for that perspective, and I'm sure everybody else is here as well. So we're at time. Do you have time for one more
Sure.
question?
Yeah.
Okay. I hope it's not too cheesy, but what are some small but mighty actions our audience could take right now?
I love that. I love that. And one of the things that I think is important for teachers to take with them is the idea that you actually really are not meant to do it all. Give yourself permission to not do it all. That's the first mighty thing you can do. Because if you want to solve a problem, you have to know which problem you're trying to solve. And if you know which problem you're trying to solve, then your actions are going to get a lot more focused. And the available avenues for how that problem can be solved, it really narrows. Like it makes it much easier to see what to do next. Thinking about a classroom environment, I'm trying to solve for the problem that the children are throwing wrappers on the floor every day, and I'm sick of cleaning up after these children. Like we're not throwing trash on the ground. If I tell you that the problem you have to solve is the children throwing trash on the ground, then there's really just like probably a handful of ways that you might address that, right? Like, and we don't have to go into that now, but I imagine if you think about it, there's like a handful of ways that you might try to fix that problem. Whereas if I give you the instructions of like, fix all the things that are going wrong in your school, well, guess what's getting fixed? Nothing. Zero things are getting fixed if you're trying to do it all. So, democracy actually works best when we identify the problem we're trying to solve, We work on that problem, and we let other people identify other problems and work on those problems. That actually is how it is supposed to work. That's how it's supposed to work. We have been convinced by social media that it's our job to fix everything. And that doesn't mean you won't ever help a friend who's working on some other thing, who's like, hey, I could really use a hand on this. Doesn't mean you will never deviate from your lane. And then when you need help, you can ask that friend, hey, I really could use some help on this. They can help you too. But identifying the problem you're trying to solve suddenly feels a lot less overwhelming because the amount of options narrows so significantly versus solve all of the problems. I would also tell you that in the same way that you did probably decided to become a teacher because of something inside of you that just felt like I really want to help kids, or I really love imparting knowledge, or that light bulb moment of seeing somebody understand something just really like it's so gratifying for me. Most nobody became a teacher to get rich and famous. We all had some sort of like intrinsic motivation that made us go into this profession. Um, you probably also have a handful of topics that you just feel really passionate about, that you just feel like I really care a lot about that. I care a lot about clean drinking water. I care a lot about whatever it is. Fill in the blank here. Um, I believe that those passions are given to you for a reason, and that those are the things you are supposed to work on. Those are the things that you are uniquely equipped to try to problems you are uniquely equipped to try to solve. It doesn't mean you'll solve them all. It does not mean that you're going to do it single-handedly. It doesn't mean that it's only your job. But I really do believe that it is not just okay, it is necessary for us all to use the skills, giftings, and passions that we are uniquely given to work on a problem that is, for whatever reason, personal experience, fascination with the topic, whatever it is, that we are uniquely called to impact. And, my path has led me somewhere I would have never imagined. I live on a dirt road in northern Minnesota. Okay. I'm not supposed to be on the New York Times bestseller list. I'm not supposed to be on a stage in front of a lot of people. I'm probably not even supposed to be here tonight. Um, but for whatever reason, every single experience that I've had has led me to this moment. So don't be discouraged if you feel like I'm not equipped to do anything about that. I've got a breastfeeding newborn. I've got, like four other little children. That's this stage of your life is just a stage, and you don't know what everything you are doing is equipping you to do for the future.
I just love that so much. I might just send this clip to all the history teachers I know, because I mean, when you walk into a classroom, all you see are, I mean, it's kind of a lot of, problems to
Yeah,
solve. And what does your brain do other than say like, oh, it's my job single-handedly to solve
to fix
all
it
of
all.
those. So I think
And then
that's a big gift. Yeah.
Yeah, we're paralyzed by the overwhelm. And so we do nothing. And that's a normal human response, by the way. And I'm not saying it's a character flaw, but it's a normal human response to being overwhelmed is to freeze and to get stuck in this, sort of functional freeze. By the way, I feel like this is very anecdotal, but I feel like a lot of teachers are oldest daughters. Are there any oldest daughters here here this evening? Or maybe there's some guys here. Dalton, I assume, are you an oldest child, Dalton?
I am, yes, I would
Mhm,
say as well. Yeah.
mhm.
Oh,
Um,
there are some babies in the
there's
room
some
too.
babies in the house, but I do feel like oldest children are uniquely good at bossing their younger siblings around, and it really does make them inclined to be very good at bossing other people's children around as well. It comes naturally. It's just like, stop doing that. That's not what we're doing anymore. We're not doing that anymore. Stop doing that.
All
That's
the women on the farm during World War II, those were
Yeah,
all older siblings, I
that's right.
believe.
They were all oldest daughters. Yes. Um, so uh, lean into it. Why not? Just go ahead and be audacious and bossy. Like, why not be what you are?
Yeah.
Need that.
I think it's such a gift to teachers to know it's not, no, it's nobody who we look up to. It was none of their aspirations to say, I'm going to fix it all. It was, I'm going to
No,
fix like the next needed thing.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Whoever your favorite his character from history, that they never tried to fix it all. And the people you hate most from history, they probably did.
It's my solution for that. It's my solution for that. I have all of the right,
Mhm.
problem
I
solving
alone can fix it.
skills.
I alone can fix it is a recipe for dictatorship. That has always played out.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I really appreciate, I mean, it's just so evident your love for the history, but also the history teachers that you've shown us tonight. So I'm
Yeah.
really grateful for you being here and
Really fun.
sharing your love of the people in your books too. I mean, it's clearly you have a relationship with those folks,
I do.
even if you haven't necessarily met all of them.
I do. I feel
Yeah.
like I know them. And I feel like when other people talk about them, I'm like, I know her.
Yeah.
I'll tell you.
But I know her middle name and you don't.
That's right. That's right. It's Poinsett. Do you
Oh,
do you have time for one more very quick little anecdote?
oh yeah, we're here as long as you are here.
After this book came out, I got an email from a man who said, Sharon, it's Tom. And that was what the email subject line said. And I'm like, who is Tom? And he said, please call me. And then he added a PS, I am 91 years old. And normally I am not in the business of calling up Sharon, it's Tom, like I'm not in the business of just randomly calling people. But the reason he was calling me, I finally got it out of him before I called him. The reason he was calling me is that he was personally friends with Septima Clark. And he read my book not knowing that she was in it. And then when he got to the page that said her name on it, he just could not believe it. He couldn't believe it that she, in many ways, historians know of her. She's not a completely unknown figure, but she does not get her top billing in the elementary school textbooks, right? She's not often part of our curriculum. We know the big names. We know the MLKs and the Rosa Parkses and a handful of other figures from the movement. But he was friends with her because he worked at Highlander Folk School. And so we talked on the phone. He actually sent me an email earlier this week. And you can tell that he has this sort of, urgency about telling his stories because he knows, like, I'm 91 years old. And he told me that shortly after the Civil Rights Act was passed, um, that he'd been so involved in the civil rights movement in the South that he sat down and he wrote his own history of everything that he had taken part in, all of the sit-ins and the marches and the like, all of the things that he had taken part in, and he wrote it all down. And then he tried to get it published, and nobody was interested. And he knew a lot of very famous people. Well, they weren't interested in the 60s. I said, but Tom, I would be interested. I would be interested. Like, do you still have the papers? And he's like, I have them in my attic. And I'm like, well, would you send them to me? And he's like, well, nobody's interested in this. And he, to this day, still believes that nobody is interested in his lived firsthand accounts of the civil rights movement and of being good friends with Rosa Parks and with Septima Clark and, his personal relationships with these people. And I've been trying to convince him that he is incorrect. And in fact, people are interested in his firsthand accounts of knowing these people. And the one thing that I said, well, what was Septima like as a person? And he said that this struck me as funny, that she was kind of boisterous and she was funny. And she was somebody who would say, don't drink water with your meal because then you might not have enough room for the food. And like, she was known for being a good cook and she wanted everybody to get enough to eat. So don't fill up on water. That obviously like really stuck with him, even though he's 91 years old. That some of these other ladies, they didn't know how to cook, but Septima did, and she wanted you to make sure that you got your belly nice and full when you got up from her table. So
I
I love
love
that.
that. That's a good reminder to not be hydrated.
Don't
We're,
drink
no,
water
we're
with your
hydrated.
meal.
Yeah, we gotta
Might
we
not
gotta
get
save
enough
room
food.
for for enough food. I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm glad you told us that story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we're really grateful for you for being a part of this tonight. I put the link to your website and also the book in the chat so everybody
Thank
can
you.
go buy a copy just in case they haven't, bought it already.
Appreciate
That is required assignment for this webinar. So Dalton, also you put a form in the chat as well. That's our like kind of exit survey for the webinars. Just some feedback for the NCHE side of things. But thank you all for being here. This is such a
everyone.
lovely session. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Sharon, for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
And
Have a great
everybody
night.
enjoy the rest of your week.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. All right. Bye-bye.